Hello, my name is Linda Blaze. I've been a watercolor artist for about 20 years now, and I see a lot of videos on the internet that show great projects, things to do with watercolors, but I don't see much of anything for the absolute beginner. So for today's class, we're just going to use just 3 brushes. I have a round, a flat, and a detail brush. These are all synthetic brushes. I found these two, the black ones here. These are Richardson Steve Quiller brushes. This one is a 1/2 inch flat. This one's a number 8 round. Another brand of synthetic brushes that I find that are good and really inexpensive are these Mimic brushes from Jerry's Artorama. And they work just fine and they're really inexpensive. The paints that I use, and I would recommend to everybody, use the best paints that you can afford. I'm using the Artist Quality Winsor Newton paints, and I've put all my paints, all of my nice juicy liquid paints, into this palette. And so that I don't forget what color is what, I have a little key of the names of all the paints, and if necessary, I have the brand. Most of these are Winsor Newton. There's one Daler-Rowney that's a different brand, and that just kind of gives me plenty of space to hold way more colors than I probably need. For paper, I'm using Arches 140 pound, and this is cold press paper. I have some paper towels, and I like Viva paper towels. They're very cloth-like. A little container of water. That's about it. So I'm going to create a value chart, and I'm going to go from the very lightest color of alizarin crimson, and I'm going to go all the way to as deep and rich and dark a color as I can get. So the first thing I've done is I've taken just a little bit of water from my water container and put it on the palette. And now I'm picking up just the tiniest amount, and even that's quite a bit, tiniest amount of alizarin crimson that I can get. This makes a really nice light pink. And I'm just going to paint a little swatch of the light pink. And then I'm going to pick up just a little more color. And I'm going to make the next value. Now, as you're first doing this, like that's a bit too dark. I got carried away. But this is just for fun and just for practice anyway. So we want it to be just a little bit darker than that first. I'm going to get just a little bit more color and do the next one. And that's looking awfully similar. I'd say I didn't get much difference at all. That's okay. I'll just leave it. Now I've added a bit more color. If you're really good, you can get 10 different shades of this. And the whole idea is just so you see that percentage of water to paint, that you can make each of the colors do amazing things, from the palest pink to the deepest, richest almost like a burgundy color. Again, that one's looking pretty similar, but it's a bit darker. I doubt that I'm going to get clear 10 of these, but now another darker and little richer pigment. Let's see if I can get that up in value a bit. Looking pretty similar to the one above. And now I'm going to go just as intense as I can get. It's pretty much full strength pigment with no extra water. And you can really see the depth of that color. What did I get? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Close. I would suggest that you do this with at least your alizarin crimson and maybe the French ultramarine blue. So this is a little sample of French ultramarine blue, and this was a rose color. But I would recommend that you do this with a few different colors on your palette. Maybe with burnt sienna, French ultramarine, alizarin crimson, and maybe with a yellow as well. I'm going to clean this out. And our next little exercise here to get familiar with what all the paint can do. So we're going to draw like a 5-petaled flower. And I'm kind of making this like a stick figure, but with no body. It's not exactly even, but good enough. So we have 5 little spokes here, and I'm just going to go around the outside and draw flower petals. So I'm going to make this a 5-petal flower. You can make them ruffled or smooth. You can have some of them overlap. And this one's going off the page. And just for fun, we'll make kind of a little circle for a center of this flower. And I will remove those pencil lines. Pencil lines always show in watercolor. So these center ones that I don't want to show up in the painting, I'm just going to erase. We're going to try out some different techniques, again, with amount of water to amount of pigment on the brush. And the first petal we're going to do, we'll call it direct painting. And that is, you just take the watercolor, you mix up the pigment to the shade and color that you want, and you just paint it on the paper. I'm getting a slightly different value there by just, instead of adding more pigment, I just added some water. And you can see the little dots of pigment. And once you lay paint down, you really can't go back in and mess with it over and over again, or you'll start getting water spots, and I'll illustrate that in a minute. This time, let's do that dark color that we made the deepest dark color we could come up with. Whoop. We're going to put that down toward the center, the really rich pigment. And then we're just going to dip into the water and come along and pull mostly water, a little pigment out. And this technique I use really often in painting because you're managing to get several values on one petal. If you get like a little bead of water, I have a slight one there, you can make a thirsty brush. You just wipe off your brush with paper towel and pick up your little bead of water. And again, you can see that pigment moving along all on its own. Okay, on the next one, we're going to try just the opposite. We'll do dark paint on the outside. This would be for, peonies sometimes are darker and then they get lighter as they go toward the center. So I'm just coming in here, picking up the edge of that dark, and then just using water. And by now I have pretty dirty water, and I often paint with that dirty water because it holds the painting together. It just kind of mixes in with every color. So now we have dark into here. This time it was supposed to be just dark on the outside. I'll put just a little more pigment here. Now we're going to use just our brush and we're just wetting the petal. Paint always follows the water. So where I put water, when I drop pigment in there, it will only move where there's water. It won't go to the outside the lines. So now I'm just going to get kind of a nice middle value, and I'm just going to drop that in. And see how it kind of spider veins. We'll drop in a little here. Maybe a little there. This works really nicely for times when you want to have some lights and darks within the same basic shape. And this will continue moving. You can see those little spidery wispy things, which are really lovely in a painting. And the last one, again, we're going to take a middle value, maybe a little extra water. And let's say that this time there's a place on this petal that is hit by sunlight and I want it to be really nice and light. I can lift some color just with a little paper towel and get a highlight in there. In order to see if paint is dry, there's a real handy way you can do that. Put the back of your hand against dry paper. I know this is dry because I haven't painted on it. You get that feel. Now you put it on your painting, and if it's not quite dry, you'll feel it as cool, a cool sensation. This is not dry. None of this is dry. And before I can go in and do fine details, I need it to be completely dry. You can use a hairdryer. I generally just kind of wait for it to get dry. Do you see these little lines here? That's the beginning of what's called a blossom in watercolor. And unless it's in like a field of flowers or something, it's undesirable because you now have pigment with kind of a splotch in it. I want to show you about a correction. See how this is kind of uneven? I'm going to tape that off. And I'm going to add some, this is just plain blue painter's tape. If you make a boo-boo during watercolor, you can take a little piece of the original magic eraser it doesn't have any bleach or anything in it, just by the nature of how the magic eraser is made. It will scrub things clean, not only your stove and doorknobs, but it can lift watercolor pigment. So if you can see, right here are my boo-boos. I've got tape down, I've pressed it down, and I'm just going to come along and scrub out that little boo-boo area. And once you've done it, you blot it with paper towel. I put the masking tape so that my magic sponge didn't come up into my petals. So now I'm just lifting this off. And you can see now it's much more even around there. Now it's dry enough, at least on this one petal. If I wanted to put some detail in, I could just put some little fine lines, kind of like the pansy beard. And it will, the line will hold. I would encourage you to do a number of these different petals and then write down on your little sample sheet what you did. Like on this one, I would put dark pigment up next to the center and then just water. On this one, we did wet on wet. We had just water, and we talked about the boundaries, that wherever the water was where the pigment would stay. And you can see what a nice sharp line we got out here at the edge. And then it had those spider areas. And look how it ended up, just really a nice, very subtle change in value so that you have a highlight there. So I would do this, just trying out every technique that you can think of. Just put water down and drop some pigment in, see what that does. Just create several different ones of these fantasy flower petals. I'll give you some practice with the brush and some practice with various techniques that you might use later on.